Hello friends, welcome to part 5 of this video series. In this video, I will start off by explaining what is REST and how the client-server communication takes place using the REST architecture. I will explain about the methods the client used to interact with the server. Then I will explain about the two main syntax of representing data in REST, that is JSON and XML formats. I will be covering the JSON structure in detail. After that, we will take a look into the Infoblox RESTful Interface, and I will explain about the common concepts and terminologies used in the Infoblox REST APIs. We will also look into how to access the REST API documentation, the Infoblox REST API documentation. Then we will invoke some of the REST APIs which are exposed by the Infoblox using a REST client tool known as PostMAN. And I will also give you a quick tutorial on how to use this PostMAN and how to invoke the different methods. Finally, I will explain how to use the APIs to automate time-consuming tasks by invoking the APIs from the code. So let's get started. So REST, or representational state transfer, is an architectural style for providing standard between computer systems on the web, making it easier for the systems to communicate with each other. So, in simple words, REST provides the architectural style for providing standard. Basically, using REST, two systems can communicate with each other more efficiently using HTTP and HTTPS. I will explain about that when we talk about the client-server communication. There are other protocols, which supports this client-server communication, and another most important or common protocol is SOAP. So in this video, I will not be explaining or going in depth on the SOAP protocol, but if you are interested, you can just Google that, and it will also explain, like, if you want to know the pros of using the REST over SOAP, then there are pretty good documentation that's available in the internet if you want to. So let's get back to our REST. So the client-server communication. The system use HTTP and HTTPS methods, or HTTPS, to obtain data and generate operations on those data in different data formats, such as XML and JSON. REST requires that a client make a request to the server in order to retrieve or modify the data on the server. A request consists of an HTTP method or HTTPS method, which defines the kind of operations you are performing. So there are 4 methods: get, post, put, and delete. So each of the method each one of these methods are used for a very specific purpose. The get method is used if you want to get or retrieve some data which is on the server. Post method is used when you want to write something new onto the server or create something new onto the server. The put method is used when you want to modify something that is already there in the server, and delete, as the name suggests. If you want to delete something that's already existing in the server, then you can use the delete method. So basically, these 4 operations, like delete, create, modify, and read or retrieve. So these 4 operations are known as the CRUD operations, and we are using these 4 methods to achieve these 4 CRUD operations. The next important thing here is the header, which allows the client to pass important information about the request to the server. So a common example of the information that is passed in the header is the authentication information. Then the data, like another example would be like the type of data the client is expecting the server to return. If the client is expecting a JSON response, then that information can be provided onto the header while making a request to the server. The next is the path or the URL or the endpoint. So this means that every server will be exposing multiple functionalities, and each of these functionalities will have a unique path or a unique URL or an endpoint. It's actually almost the same. So for example, if we take an example on the Infoblox side, if you want to create a zone or if you want to read information about a zone, then the URL you will be having one URL. But let's say if you want to create an IPv4 network, then the URL would be a different. So basically, for each functions that the APIs are providing, there will be a separate URL, and these informations can be found on the API documentation, which I'll be covering in the later part of the video. And then finally, we have the body. Body in a request contains the information or data that we want to pass or the client wants to pass to the server. Only two methods supports a body, that is the put method and the post method. Okay, so now JSON and XML. Okay, so both this JSON and XML are syntax used for sending and receiving information or data from to the server. So I have in this I have provided some information or some data in the XML format and in the JSON format. But if you closely look into it, the information or the data contained is exactly the same. It is just that the syntax are different. But in this video, we will not be covering XML in detail because we are more focused onto the JSON. So if you want to learn more about XML, then you can, there are so many, like I said before, there are so many documentation you can refer. So yeah, so let's focus on JSON. Okay, so this JSON object, like first let me explain what a JSON object is. A JSON object is written in key value pairs, and it is always surrounded by braces. An example of a simple JSON object is as provided or given below. So query is the key and the bread is the value, and there is curly braces above and below it. Now the value to the key, in this case bread, it's a simple string. It can also be a number, or it could be a Boolean value like a true or false, or it can be an array of values. For example, this query key can have an array of values like bread, pasta, then burger, pizza. Like it can have 4 values, basically an array. Or it can be a JSON object which again contains a key value pair. That is, this query will have a value which can be another JSON object. Or this is where it gets kind of complex, but if you just spend some time, then it's not that hard to understand. It can also be an array of JSON objects. So in the next slide, I have provided an example of a complex JSON object. This is not that complex, but yeah, if you're trying to learn JSON for the first time, then yes, this would be definitely complex. So I'll explain to you what this is. In this JSON object, the fields FQDN has is a key and the value is test.com. It's a simple string. And the next three key, that is use allow query, use allow transfer, and use allow update, has a Boolean value. But the next one, the grid primary, you see there is a square bracket. So whenever you see a square bracket, it means it's an array. And now inside this array, we have, since there is a curly braces, we understand that it's a object, JSON object. So basically this grid primary key holds an array of JSON objects. But in this case, we have only one object, but it can have n number of objects, like we see in the next one. Allow query. If you see here, again, it has square brackets, means that it's an array. And if you see here, there are two JSON objects which is defined in that key. Allow update also, it's an array which has one JSON object. And finally, we have restart if needed. That's a simple key value, and that value is a Boolean value. So now let's talk about the RESTful interface offered or provided by Infoblox. Infoblox REST interface uses HTTP methods for operations and supports input and output in JSON and XML. It supports the primary and most commonly used HTTP methods or verbs, that is the post, get, put, and delete, which I have explained before. These corresponds to create, read, update, and delete, or the CRUD operations, which I have talked about earlier. Now, all API calls are encrypted using SLS, TLS, and authenticated using HTTP basic authentication. What that means is that if you are a client and if you have to consume the Infoblox APIs, then you need to provide the authentication. That is the first thing. And second thing, the data that you are passing or data that you're sending to the server is secure because the data is encrypted using SSL and TLS. The next is the request. So the request has three parts: the URL, arguments, and the body. So the URL contains the IP address or the FQDN of the Infoblox grid master, and it also has the WAPI version. And the last thing, the /network, is the resource. Next is the arguments. Arguments is something we append at the end of the URL, and it starts with an underscore. And these, I've also provided the most common examples of most common arguments that we use in here, and that is the return fields and the schema. And then we have the body, and body is nothing but, we have explained it before, if you want the client to send some information to the server, then those information are contained in the body in either the XML or JSON format. Now, Infoblox WAPI object reference. Every WAPI or every object, first of all, let's talk about what an object is. Everything in Infoblox, like it could be a network, it could be a zone, it could be an IP address, it could be a range. Everything is an object, and every object will have a unique object reference. Think of it as like a unique ID. So why this ID is used when we are consuming those APIs, then I will explain to you. So WAPI returns this reference when an object is created, modified, deleted, or read. Like I said, this reference is used as an to identify the object. Now, the RESTful documentation or the Infoblox REST documentation is available at your gridmaster's IP /WAPI document. So let's consume, or let's invoke some of the APIs. So for that, let's go to Okay, so first let me take you to the documentation. So infoblox.local domain is the FQDN of my grid master and /vappy-doc. So this is the documentation that we're going to refer. So let's start off by invoking some of the APIs using PostMap. So that way I can explain to you what are the different methods or the different the URL, all those things that we have discussed earlier. Okay, so this is the tool, and this tool is known as PostMan. So this tool lets you invoke the RESTful APIs. So this using this tool, like earlier I've explained about the different methods, right? Post, get, put, and delete. So all those methods we can with all those methods can be invoked. So let me show you how you can frame a request. So let me click on this plus. So the first thing is the method. So depending on what kind of operation you want to perform, you have to select either get, just click on here, post, put, or delete. So let's start off with retrieving some data that is already there in the server. So now you have to provide the REST URL. So I have explained you before, a REST URL will be the first part of it will be the protocol itself, and since Infoblox is using HTTPS SSL, that's the reason why it's using HTTPS, then followed by the FQDN or the IP address of the grid master, and then Vappy and the version. So till here, let me copy it. So this would be common for all the API request or the API that we are going to invoke. So now the next thing is the resource. Now, what are the resources? So for that, let's go to the documentation. The resource could be any one from these objects. As I said before, each of these objects provides some functionality. For example, this admin group will if you're using a get call, then we'll be able to retrieve all the admin groups. Admin role, like the name suggests, it will be we'll be able to retrieve all the admin roles, then the users, etc. So let's say I want to retrieve all the DNS zones. So for that, we need to dig through it, through the objects, and the object would be zone auth. Okay, so if you click on this one, so this object has an authoritative zone, is a zone which is local. This local server is authoritative for the data of this and response to queries. So this object, if we use, we will be able to find all the authoritative zones that is there in our Infoblox appliance. So this is my resource part, and right now I'm not providing any arguments. I will come to the arguments in a bit. So now what have we done so far? So we have provided the the method, and we have created or constructed the URL. The next is the authorization or the authentication information that we have to provide. So in when I was explaining, I told you it supports basic auth. So it is one of the type of authentication that is used in REST, but Infoblox supports only basic authentication. So we select that and we give the username and password that we use to connect to the Infoblox, assuming that that account or that user has API access to the Infoblox appliance itself. And since I'm using the default admin Infoblox username and password, and I click on update request. So what happens is that a header gets automatically created and added. When I was explaining the headers, I talked about the in using headers we can provide the authentication information. So this authorization header gets added when we are providing a basic auth and click on update the request. Now since this is a get, that's the reason why this body is grayed out. Like I explained before, only post and put methods have a body. So now let's try to send this request and see what happens. So as you can see on the response, first of all we got a JSON response, and what we found that these are the set of zones. Like if you see, the FQDN field contains the name of the zones. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think this is one reverse lookup zone that is present. So if you see here, let's go to the UI. If you go to the default view, then we can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is the reverse lookup zone that we saw. So let's get back to Postman. So all the zone information we are able to get, and also we have this underscore reference. So this was the unique or the reference object reference which I was explaining before. So for each of these zones, like if I need to modify this particular zone, then I have to use this particular reference key. So I hope it's clear. If I have to retrieve information about this zone, or if I have to update this zone, then this is the reference identifier or the reference object reference identifier that I have to use, because this would be unique in the complete Infoblox of, like, each object will have a unique reference key. Okay, so now what we did right now is we got information, or we retrieved information about all the authoritative DNS zones from our Infoblox appliance using this get method. So now before we can, the next method that we're going to talk about is the post method. That is, if I need to create a new zone, then I need to use post. But before that, we need to know what are the important, so we need to construct the body. So for constructing the body, we need to know what are the fields that it is expecting that we need to provide for constructing the data which we need to send to the server. So for that, there are three methods. The first one is we'll check for the schema for this particular object. So for that we use argument and the argument is schema. And now if I click on send, so it contains all the fields which I can use while using this particular object. That is, for this particular object, these are the set of fields that I can use. Now, what do you mean by fields? See, field is each and every property that we see in the UI is a field. For example, allow transfer. So this allow transfer is a place where we are providing the IP address or the network information which which that particular zone allows the transfer to happen. So rather than providing that information from the UI, we can invoke this API, and when we are using the post method, that is, we are writing, post means writing something or creating something on the server, then we would be able to create a zone, and yeah, we can configure the values for this particular field. So but there are so many fields in here. So if I want to construct or create a zone, there must be, what are the we don't need all to populate all these fields. If you see here, standard field, so we are concerned only about those fields which the mandatory fields, the minimum number of fields which we need to provide for creating a zone. So how to identify that? A simple method is like just standard field equals search for standard field equals true. So now we got to see that out of these many fields, only 2 of them are mandatory. One is the FQDN field, and it makes sense also. See, if I want to create what do you call a new zone, then I need to provide the FQDN of that zone. So that's what it means. And the next one, I believe it should be the view. So whenever I'm creating a zone, I have to specify to which view that particular zone is going to fall into. So these are the 2 main mandatory fields which I have to provide while constructing the body. So now I hope so now let's try to create a zone. So for creation, we have to use post, and we will remove this argument from here, but the object will still remains the same, because we are the creation will also be, since we are going to create a zone, we will be use an authoritative zone, we will use zone underscore auth. Okay, and then there is another thing also you have to look in here. So there is in the field, there is a key called isArray. So isArray is false, means that our JSON object will be a simple key value pair. But if isArray equals true, then the value of my key will be a JSON array. I will explain about that in while we are doing this. In at least in this case, both the mandatory fields isArray key is having a value false. So that means we don't need to we can use a very basic simple JSON to achieve this. So I'll show you how we can do that. So body, I'm selecting raw, and the syntax, I'm using JSON. So like I explained before, it starts with, the JSON object will be between a curly braces. So now let's give the 2 fields that is required, fqdn, and it has got a string value. So my test zone.com, and view is the view default. Okay, so these are the two mandatory fields that is required to uh, to make a request to the server. So let's see what happens when we give to, so this is, so let me recollect, let me rephrase it again. This is a post request. That means we are going to create a new zone. This is my URL, and I have already provided the authorization, and I also and since it's a post, I need a body, and I have constructed the body. So now let me send it. Okay, so we got some response. So that means we got a the, what do you call, the unique identifier for the new zone I created. But if, I mean, I would show you, like, if I needed to see more information, then I could use another argument called uh, return fields. I will be explaining about the return fields in the next, when we make the next API call. So for the time being, let's go and check in the UI if this particular zone has been created. So let's do a refresh. So if you see, a new zone has been created, but I have just provided, so there is no name servers associated to it. It is because I haven't mentioned those fields when I created the request or when I consumed that particular API call. So now what we are going to do is we need to modify this zone so that I would be able to add that particular add a name server to this zone. So let's see how we can do it. So I hope you recollect, if I need to modify, then we need to use put, and then so now since we are modifying this particular object, I copy paste the whole thing, and then I paste the object. So this is my URL. So now my body, I will have to provide those additional fields via which I can assign a member or a name server to this zone. So for that, we need to understand the so that's the reason why we have to refer to the schema, so that the schema will tell us how to provide those fields or how that the body can be constructed. So in this case, I think I have made that request before, so I know. Okay, so this is how the JSON and So so this is the field grid underscore primary via which I can assign this a particular member to that zone. So I have to provide this information, and as you, I mean, if you have used Infoblox, you know that whenever you are creating a zone and assigning it to a member, then you need to restart the service. Only then it will take effect. So there is, so we can give that also, and for restarting the service, there is the field for that. So what we need to do is we need to search for restart. Okay, so restart if needed. So this field will check if a restart is required, but in our case, like once we have added a zone, or when we are assigning a member, a name server to a zone, a restart is required. So we give uh, so it takes boolean value. So let's try to fire this request. So let me uh, let me say it one more time. So the request or the method type is put because we want to modify the zone that we have created before, that is by adding or associating a name server, or we are providing a grid primary to that particular zone. And then we are also saying we have to restart, so that for the change to take effect we have to restart the DNS named service, and that's the reason why we are providing that also in here. And then this is the URL. So since we are modifying this very specific object, so that's the reason why we have you know used this object. So now I will also use an argument, and this time I'll use let me use these two arguments. I'll explain to you what these are. Okay, so return fields in the sense like when whatever fields that you give in here, in your response that you get, that field will be there. Means if so, earlier when we created a request or when we created that zone, we got only this unique identifier. But if I need some more information to be returned for my request, then I need to use this argument called return field, and I have to give a value, and I mean I can give multiple things separated by comma, and I'm giving my FQDN and grid primary. So let me send this so that you will be able to understand the difference between this output and what the output that this one returns. So now, along with the reference, you can see the FQDN and the grid primary associated to that particular zone. The reason being you have given these two fields in here. So now let's see in the UI if this particular my zone is now associated with that name server. So my test zone, so this is the one that we modified, and now you could see that in the name server my Infoblox appliance has been added as the grid primary. So let's go back to Postman again. So now we have, first what we did is we did a get, and we got all the information about uh, all the zones. And if okay, so let's say I want to get information only about this specific zone. So in that case, I have to make it get, and whenever I'm making it get, my body will be grayed out because get and delete doesn't have a body, and my URL is this. I mean, this will always be the constant, and since I want to get information about this specific object or that particular zone, so that's why I'm giving the reference ID or the reference for that particular object. And then, as I explained before, the return field argument I'm adding is because if I want to get information about the FQDN, for example, okay, now for the time being, let me not give the, I will give only the FQDN. So let's see how the output comes. So if you see here, I'm getting information about my zone, but I'm getting only the FQDN information. So now if I give comma grid underscore primary, so now it provides information about the name server that is associated to it, that is its grid primary. And I can, if I give comma view, it will also return the view which this particular zone belongs to. Okay, so now we have gone through three methods. We have gone through the get method, create method, and the update method, and the last one is the delete method. So for the delete method also, we are not providing any body. So let me go ahead and delete this one, and I will go ahead and use, this is the part which is common, and since I'm going to delete this very specific zone, so I'm giving the reference ID associated to that zone, and that's it. I already have provided the authorization information. So if I just click on delete, so this is what I got a reference ID back. So that means a delete operation was successful. So we can confirm it by, so right now you see that my test zone is there. So now if I do a refresh, that my test zone is not there, it's deleted. So these, I mean, so I hope, so this is how you need to use Postman to invoke the APIs of uh, Infoblox, or for that matter, you can use Postman to invoke any APIs. So the steps to invoke the APIs are the same. So you need to get the URL, you need to you need to refer the documentation guide to understand how to construct the URL, how to provide the authentication, because some systems doesn't maybe supporting some other authentication mechanism, like they will be supporting token based authentication, and the header information, they will be expecting very specific headers while consuming those APIs. So all those information you can get it only from their API documentation guide. So yeah, this was a quick tutorial on the on two things, on Postman itself, which is a very useful tool for testing the APIs, and also we have invoked four APIs of Infoblox. So like that, if you refer to this guide, so right now we have touch based only on one object, zone auth. there are these many objects that we can use to perform different functionalities. Like there is an object we can use for creating networks, creating ranges, creating pool. So you just have to go through this documentation and um, how the get is the most easiest one. So you just have to provide that object name and then invoke that particular and you have to click on send request, and you will be able to see if there is an object, or if there is something that has been created for that particular object. It will give you a response back. And then if you have to create, that's a tricky part actually. For that you have to understand the schema. You need to understand what are the fields out of, like, in our zone creation itself. If you take an example, there are like almost 30-40 fields. Out of that, only 2 were mandatory, so we provided those fields, and the zone got created. And the next one is the update. So if you create something and then if you want to make changes onto that, then you use the put or the update method for making those modifications. And finally the delete, for removing something or deleting something from the server. So that was about giving a quick tutorial on Postman, and also on how to invoke the APIs of Infoblox. So you can try out these APIs, like the different APIs, and if you have any questions, then you can just let me know. I can help you out in that. So just let me know in the comment section. And finally, let's talk about, like, so what is the actual use of APIs? So basically, it helps you automate manual task, which is actually time consuming, and it makes life really easy. So I will explain to you what I mean by that. So let's say, let me go to the UI. Okay, so if you see here, okay, so if you see here, if I need to create a zone, there is a set of steps that I need to follow. Like I have to just click on this one, click on this. I have to provide a name, and I also need to provide the name server. And if I need to update these the query section or the zone transfer or the updates, if I have to provide values to each one of them, it is actually a kind of a time consuming process. So that's where we can automate. Like, let's say you are a network administrator who is managing the Infoblox appliance, and you've been asked to create like 10 new domains, and the domain, it has to be automated. Like whenever, like, so it's like whenever let's say there is some other system which uh, you know uh, which is being creating new zones, and whenever a zone gets created in another system, the same zone has to be created in Infoblox. So that you want to automate it. Like, so you create a custom code, and you check, or your custom code talks to that system and see if a new zone has been created. And if it it finds out that a zone has been created, then a zone should be created in here also. So I'll just give you a use case of create this the for creating a zone, multiple zones in one go, with properties that has been defined by consuming the Infoblox APIs. For that, I have created. Okay, so this is a utility which I created in Java. So this is from okay, on a high level I can explain. This is a tool via which I can consume n number of APIs in one go. It has multiple functionalities, but for this video, or so this is what this tool does. So I will just execute this one. Okay, so if you see here, uh, there are three test cases, or I would say three zones that got created. So basically, it was a post call, and there is a body. Like, I have already constructed three bodies, and the only difference is in the name, FQDN. So this is this one, and this is 789, and it has these many information. Like, it has the the name server information. I have updated the query information, transfer information, and the update information. So in just one click of executing this particular code, three zones got created in Infoblox. So let's verify that. So test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. Three zones got created in less than a second. And if I just go ahead and look for the properties, whatever I've provided in here, like in that the body, or the, because it was a, since it's a create, so it's a post request. So whatever I have information that I've provided in the body, it is reflecting in here. So this is, so using API. So the whole purpose of me explaining about this one is, you can create your own code via which you can do a lot of automation. So this is one example. Just like that, if you want to create networks, you can consume the APIs for creating the networks, and you can integrate your code with some other systems, and you can poll that particular system and see if there a new network is been present there. If yes, the same moment you can fire the Infoblox API to get that same network created in here also. So there are a lot of use cases that you can think of. So depending on the requirements that or the things that depending on what the actual requirements is, the use cases may vary. But this API interface, the main advantage is that it provides a lot of automation functionalities, or scope for automations. So that's the use case of using APIs. So let's have a quick recap of all the things that we learned. So the first one, okay, so we understood, like, we have I explained you about what is REST and how the client server communication happens, and then I explained you what this JSON and XML, the difference between it, and about the JSON structure and all those things. And then we have learned about the Infoblox REST interface, and then how the accessing the documentation, the REST API documentation. And we also looked into consuming the Infoblox APIs using four main methods: the get method, post method, put method, and delete method using PostMan. And I also explained to you like how you can use Postman for making API calls. And finally, I have explained to you how these APIs can be used for automation by creating your own custom code, or by creating your code. It could be in Python, it could be in Bash, it could be in Java. So depending on your requirement, you can do a lot of automations. And the API that the RESTful interface provided by uh, Infoblox is a really useful functionality or the tool. So that's it for this video. Hope you found this informative. If you have any queries, post it in the comment section, and I will try to answer most of them. So yeah, that's it. So we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.